about modernisation of legacy controllers and I/O. There's not really anything new here, but this slide deck didn't exist before. It was in multiple different places. So what I did was I put it together in effectively a single place and tried to bring in as much information as we've got about what the history of the Emerson controllers is and how we can take forward those legacy controllers. Because one of our big strengths as Emerson is we've got this great modernization story, and we can go back to controllers which were installed many, many years ago, all the way back to Series 90, which I was involved in the launch of way back in 1990. We can modernize those to the latest generation PACSystems RX3i. And the key is, we can keep a lot of the existing I/O, so you're not disturbing the field wiring. So that means that the modernization process is pretty fast. As soon as you start unscrewing wires and screwing them back in again, that can be very time consuming. And the other factor is risk. If you've got that original wiring, you're reducing the risks, you're reducing the amount of testing you require, and it gives you a fallback strategy. If you just replace a few components but keep the wiring and the I/O modules, you can replace the original components and you can eliminate that update risk. So that there's a lot of nice factors there. And the other aspect is the application. With Pack Machine Edition, which is our latest programming software, that can import applications from Control, which is a legacy programming software. It can import programs from VersaPro, which replaced Control. They were our two Windows-based packages. And then we go back to the DOS-based software called Logic Master. We can import programs from that as well. So programs developed up to 30 years ago now, we can import those almost 100%. Not completely, because there was a few caveats around communications perhaps and special function blocks and a few programming languages like sequential function chart or SFC. But generally, for most people, for about 95% or more of applications, we can import the entire application. And the reason that's important is, a lot of our competitors, that they claim to be able to do this, but they can't. It's maybe a 90% conversion or an 85% conversion, which sounds good. But my knowledge of these applications is, when you're talking about 85, 90%, if you think about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, it may be 80% of the project comes in, but it's that extra 20%, which then turns out to be 80% of the work. It's like an inversion. That small bit of work actually takes the most amount of time. So the better your conversion process, the less of that additional work you need to do. And particularly with legacy systems, if there isn't much knowledge out there, or the people who originally wrote the application, if they're not around anymore, having to support that and being able to debug an old program is a big task. So the more you can import, the better the conversion process is, the less risk there is, and the faster the conversion and the update is. So my plan is to go through our legacy controllers and then just explain how we can convert them up to the latest version of our controllers. And there's quite a lot of nuances here. There's a lot of old controllers out there. The key ones would be the Series 9030. That's what you're going to come across the most. But there are also some other controllers out there, so I'll explain about those. And then we get into some specialized functions like GMR, which is the Genius Modular Redundancy System, which is a safety system. And there's maybe some special caveats there around safety and what we can do there. So it's not always straightforward, but for the majority of customers, it is a good story. And it's good even if you're not talking to customers that are using our legacy controllers, this is something that we're going to take forward. We know as a business, Emerson knows that being able to support existing customers, being able to give them a modernization path in the future, that's good for new customers as well as existing customers, because customers who going to want to know, what am I going to do in 5 or 10 years time when this CPU is obsolete, or when I want this new capability, or maybe when my machine needs modernizing. So it's also about additional things like spare parts availability, as well as being able to modernize and upgrade. So I've got quite a few slides here, but some of it is a little bit repetitive, but we'll go through it, and then I can let you have a copy of the recording, and I can let you have a copy of the slide deck. So if we look at the history, first of all, the history goes back a long way. But I think if we go back more than 30 years now, then we're looking at GE Industrial Controls, which was selling the original legacy controllers, the Series 1, 3, 5, and 6, and also Genius I/O. And I do have a timeline for when these were introduced, but they were introduced all in around about the early 1980s to the mid 1980s. And I think, except for Genius IO, which you might still come across, yeah, probably all the Series 1, 3, 5, and 6 controllers have probably all been replaced by now. If not, we can potentially look at modernising them. Series 1 and 3 are very old, small controllers. And the good news about those is, yeah, they were very simple. Yeah, they only had like 1 kilobyte of memory, not 1 megabyte, yeah, 1 kilobyte. So yeah, they could only store like, a few hundred instructions. So typically with those, you just re-enter the program manually and you're done in a day or two, and it just works. So yeah, with the 5 and 6, they were a bit bigger, but I think, yeah, with the complexity of those applications, I think it's pretty unlikely you're going to come across any of those now. We do have a company in Sweden, a company called Ardec, that has some Series 5 still installed, and they are looking at modernising them. One of the challenges is, with this very old equipment, it is very reliable. It's not using high-tech surface mount technology. It's using old-fashioned, big integrated circuits, and it is reliable. But I think those users, by now, after 30 years, they will have modernised. When we come on to the GE FANUC joint venture, so that's where GE and FANUC, so FANUC is Fujitsu Numerical Controls of Japan, they formed this joint venture with GE to sell controllers and CNCs around the world. And I think it's from about 1990 onwards, that's where we'll start to see more and more of the applications where we can get involved in modernisation. So the Series 90 controllers, they were introduced in 1990. You had the Series 9030, which was the smaller controller, was introduced actually in 1990, and the Series 9070, which was its bigger brother, that was introduced actually in 1989. But yeah, sales didn't really ramp up for a few years. But we do see still a lot of those Series 90 controllers installed now. Yeah, the Series 90 controllers didn't go away until about 2017. So yeah, people were still buying them, installing them until quite recently. Yeah, there are some other packages in there, some other platforms. Yeah, Versamax was introduced in 1999. That's still available today. PACSystems were introduced in 2003. So that's where we get our current range from. Although it was introduced in 2003, it's still a current active product. We've got new CPUs, we're continuing to enhance the capabilities, we're adding new I/O modules. So it's interesting that a lot of people think, well, that's nearly 20 years old now, but to us it's still a modern current platform with a long life ahead. There's a few other milestones in there. We bought the MOST technology, which was I can't remember what MOST stands for, but it was something like MTL Operating Systems Technologies or something. MTL, that was the old company based in Luton, now owned by Eaton, but they had this hardware platform called PAC 8000. So we acquired that technology from MTL in 2008. And we didn't discontinue that until quite recently, but we can still sell the I/O modules. So there's a lot of technology there which you might come across. Yeah, MTL, particularly being a British company, yeah, they were quite successful in selling their products in the UK. So you might come across those. So other milestones, things about like the joint venture was dissolved in 2009. Interestingly, that's 12 years ago now, but people still call us FANUC or GE FANUC, even though that name is long gone. But the name was still used, and some of the older systems still have the GE FANUC branding on. So if people talk about GE or GE FANUC or GE Intelligent Platforms, yeah, that's our hardware. So we can look at that hardware and we can see how we can modernize it. And then a few other milestones. The Quick Panel Plus was introduced. That replaces the legacy Quick Panel. We introduced the new RSTIE PIO in 2015, which can be used to upgrade some old systems. And then, of course, in 2019, that's when GE Intelligent Platforms hardware business was acquired by Emerson. So since then, we've become Emerson. We were not really known as a business unit inside Emerson. Instead, we're using our brand names. So the key brand name is PACSystems for the hardware, and for the software, we use Movicon. But for this sort of application exercise here, we're going to be mainly referring to PACSystems. So if we look at some of the brand names we have, there's a lot of brand names that can be modernized. So some of these are GE and GE FANUC brand names. But there's also some brand names which are third-party brand names. We did sell our hardware to other companies. Particularly we sold what was the Alspar range to Sedgwick, Sedgwick later became Alstom, and then later were acquired by GE, actually, GE Power Conversions. But we continue to rebadge some of those products under the Alspar name. So you might come across those systems as well. But if you look here, you can see these discontinued products on the left. So we've got the Series 90 range, Series 90 Micro. There's a nice modernization path there to the Versamax Micro. That does require complete replacement of the hardware, but you can upgrade the software through Pack Machine Edition. Then we've got the Series 9030 controller, which was also badged as the Alspar 8035. And that's the one where you're probably going to come across the most. We sold over 500,000 Series 9030 systems, including the Alspar 8035 version, and they can be very easily modernized to PACSystems RX3i. There was the bigger brother, the Series 9070, and its corresponding Alspar 8075. I'm not sure how many of those you'll come across, because they were generally used in much larger systems, and they were also used in the safety system, which is the GMR system. So GMR stands for Genius Modular Redundancy, and typically that was used for safety for SIL 2 or SIL 3 applications like emergency shutdown and oil and gas. So if you come across 9070 systems, you do need to be a bit careful, but it's not a safety system. Because if it's not a safety system, it's straightforward. We can upgrade to PACSystems RX3i. But if there's any sort of safety certification, then we need to replace it with a safety approved system. And actually, I've just heard in the last few days, currently we would replace a GMR system with Mark VIeS, which is the safety system that we sell, which is actually a GE system still. But there is now, or soon will be, a possibility to upgrade a GMR system to an RX3i. So we are contemplating, or we are getting the RX3i approved for safety applications in a very limited set of circumstances. But for now, I think GMR, we'd normally look at replacing that with Mark VIeS for safety. Then you can see other controllers. We've got the PAC 8000 controller systems, which we can modernize with PACSystems RX3i. And I've got some more slides to go into some of these in more detail. SafetyNet was a safety version of PAC 8000. Again, we can modernize that to Mark VIeS. We've got Genius IO. So Genius IO is like a house brick sized IO product. And we can potentially modernize that using PACSystems RX3i. Again, a lot of Genius IO was used in GMR systems. So we need to be careful in case there's some sort of safety certification there. So Field Control is another legacy IO product. We can replace that with Versamax. And then you've got the PACSystems RX7i. Not many of those were sold, so we can probably replace those with PACSystems RX3i. But the PACSystems RX7i was like a larger version of the RX3i, more powerful. It had a VME backplane, but I don't think we sold that many, certainly not around here in the UK. So we do have some legacy HMI type products and operator interfaces. The quick panel, the original control in view, they're still around. This is part numbers beginning IC754. And what happened with that was like a set of quick panels, operator interfaces with a range of different display sizes. There was a 6-inch, an 8-inch, there was a 12-inch and a 15-inch. Some of those can be modernized very easily with Quick Panel Plus. Some of them need a bit more work. I just got a request this morning about an old 6-inch version. So we do have a Quick Panel Plus that we can use to replace the old Quick Panel, but it's got a different panel cutout. The application can be taken through Pack Machine Edition, but we need to look at the communication protocols. So, again, these communications can often be an issue. And then there's some other legacy industrial PCs. The Wolverine was a Zone 2 PC that we can replace with an RXI panel PC. There was an older Intelligence IPC that again can be replaced by RXI panel PC. And then motion, we do have Pack Motion using FANUC motors, and that can be replaced by our latest Pack Motion servo. So you can see that there's a lot of legacy systems out there, a lot of legacy products. It can get quite complex, particularly when you start looking into communications. Motion can also be quite complex because although we've got Pack Motion there with FANUC, there's also a lot of other motion derivatives, including stepper motors, something called VersaMotion. There's other different types of motion products. So we just need to be a bit careful about what there is. But I think the most ones you'll come across will be the Series 9030 range. And luckily, that's the one that's easiest to modernize. I say luckily, we've put a lot of time into making it easy. So let's have a look at a few of these and see how we can modernize them. So we'll start with the Series 9030. Series 9030 came out in 1990, and at the time it was a very successful controller. So it was a so-called shoebox sized controller, about a 3U rack height, chassis based. So you had a chassis, and onto the chassis you plugged in a power supply, and then it had a CPU module, and then there were I/O modules. There was a range of communication modules, and it had local expansion using a parallel I/O type cable. Now, what happened was, there were various component availability issues. There was the issue around restrictions of hazardous substances. So what we did was we moved the Series 9030 range into mature status in 2015. And really the reason for that was, we had to do an update on the CPUs. All the modules needed a complete redesign for restriction of hazardous substances for Roche. And we already had the PACSystems RX3i. So we decided, rather than carry on with 2 sets of modules, 2 sets of CPUs, let's just discontinue the Series 9030 and we'll make it a straightforward upgrade to the RX3i. Now, that Roche, in case you're not aware of that, that's the restriction of hazardous substances. That's about use of various chemicals, particularly lead and cadmium. Lead was an issue in solder, and what lead had to do was, we had to redesign all the modules to use different types of solder, but that potentially meant making sure that those modules would still work. You'd think changing solder is straightforward, but unfortunately it's not. You've got to make sure that you've still got the mechanical properties. There's spacing around the different chips, and there's various different things around, potentially slightly different resistances. But in order to have it completely redesigned, and also the factors around recertifying all of the modules, we decided the best thing would just be discontinue the product. So the Roche cutoff in Europe was the 21st of July. So from that time onwards, there were really no new parts or spares available. It is possible to take modules that have failed in the field. They can be returned for repair. And that service is a 7-year service that we're going to offer. So if we go from 2017 counting onwards, that's going to be available till 2024. So if someone did get a 9030 failure, they could send a module back. And then customer care can give you a price for repairing that module. If it's an I/O module, if it's the Series 9030 modules all began IC693, so excuse me. So if you had an IC693 MDL module or an IC693 ALG module, we did redesign some of those modules for Roche compatibility. So what you could do is you could take an older IC693 module and you could replace it with an IC694 equivalent. Now, the IC694 modules, in general, with 1 or 2 exceptions, it's the identical hardware, but it has been redesigned for Roche, but it does use a different color plastic. So you'd be replacing what was originally a black plastic module with what's now a blue plastic module, but functionally they will work. There's only a couple of modules where they have different firmware, and that's the MDL 660 and the MDL 754. Those modules you can't use the IC694 equivalent, but for pretty much every other module you could. Now, because the Series 9030 is discontinued, it's no longer supported. So the issue there to a customer is if they take an IC694 module and plug it into an IC693 chassis, we have to say that we can't support it in that chassis. And that's because the underlying chassis is no longer supported. So if they did get problems, they'd have to verify those problems inside an IC694 or 695 chassis. But in theory, it does work, and we can go and say, yes, it will work, but there is that caveat around what we can actually support. Now, in terms of programming, the Series 9030 today is programmed with Pack Machine Edition. We continue to support programming of the Series 9030 in the latest versions of Pack Machine Edition. There's no end date to support for the Series 90 series, but there's no enhancements planned other than the general enhancements you get around Pack Machine Edition, like, bug fixes and supporting latest operating systems. But there will be no new feature enhancements to Series 9030s. Something that also makes this more complicated is, you've also got then availability of things like programming cables, availability of batteries. There's a lot of people who are finding, well, I can continue to run my Series 9030. I've got the skills, I've got the software, but if there's new people coming along, they can't get the programming cable. Also, if the batteries run flat, then you can't get any spare batteries. So it is getting to sort of an end of life now. 2017 was a while ago now. And although you've got this capability to get spares and so on, it's beginning to get to the end of life stage where modernisation is recommended. So anyone who comes on to me with a Series 9030, the recommendation is pretty straightforward, and that would be modernise the Series 9030 to RX3i. So the RX3i is our latest generation controller. Although it was launched in 2003, it continues to be enhanced, it continues to be supported. There's no end of life in plan. We're going to continue having this for the next 10 years or more. We've gone into writing to commit this product, but we'll have support for a long time ahead. But it is also designed for modernisation of legacy systems. So we have a new chassis, but the new chassis, you've got the 7-slot and the 12-slot. They are the same size as the existing Series 9030 5-slot and 10-slot modules. And the way it works is, if you want to upgrade the Series 9030, what you do is you have the new chassis, you install a new CPU, you install a new power supply, but what you've got on the backplane is we've actually got two backplanes. There's the new PCI backplane, which is based on PCI, but there's also the legacy Series 9030 backplane, which is a serial backplane. So what it means is you can keep existing I/O modules. They will plug into the new backplane using that legacy serial bus. So you'll have a combination of black I/O modules in blue plastic, but it fully works and it's fully supported. And in the new chassis, we also then support hot swap of those I/O modules. So we're adding capability as well. But what it means is you can keep that existing I/O wiring. So you're not disturbing the field wiring, you're keeping the existing I/O modules. So that's what makes it very low risk. You can upgrade very quickly. Just unplug the I/O modules, unscrew the rack, put the new rack in, put the new modules back in. People are able to perform an upgrade in a matter of just a few hours. And then, as I say, it's low risk. If anything went wrong, maybe the program conversion doesn't work, or maybe you find that there's some timing issue because the new CPUs are much faster, or maybe you find that the new communications you've programmed isn't working properly. You've got a low risk strategy because you can go back to the previous version of the system just by putting the original components back in. As long as you've got the battery backup of the CPU and you haven't lost the program, you'll be fine. You can go back. So very low risk, very straightforward modernisation, and relatively cheap as well, because if you're upgrading an older Series 9030 module, the biggest memory size was only about 200 or so kilobytes, and those applications should easily fit into our CPE 302, which has got 2 megabytes of memory. So that means that you can use a relatively low-cost CPU, chassis and power supply without having to replace all of those I/O modules as well. So it means that you're looking at a list price of around about £2,000 to £3,000 or less, a minimal engineering cost because you're not rewiring and you're not replacing the I/O modules. You're not having to drill new holes in the panel. You're not needing to rip and replace everything. So it is a very effective low-risk modernisation. Now, there are some issues. If you've got Genius bus controllers, you can continue to use an existing bus controller, but we no longer sell the new bus controllers. So that means you're stuck with what you've got. If you haven't got spares, that becomes a risk. But we do have a communications gateway for Genius. So what you can do there is you can install a Profinet controller, and then we have the Genius communications gateway allows you to implement all of your existing Genius communications. So that's good for upgrading all of the I/O. But there's something called Genius Global Data, which isn't supported by the Genius Communications Gateway. So if people are doing peer-to-peer communications, they can replace that with Ethernet Global Data, which is what EGD is. But that would mean a bit of reprogramming or a bit of reconfiguration. So that's where these sort of applications start to get a bit complicated if it's a large application and you've maybe got communications between systems. So generally the program is straightforward. Yeah, we take the same program structure, the same memory. So the Series 9030 program, whether it's programmed in Logic Master or Control or VersaPro, that will import nicely into Pack Machine Edition. There is some issues there around SFC. So SFC is not supported, and also C blocks must be recompiled, but not many applications use those. You have the vast majority of applications with ladder logic, and they will import nicely. So the only real issue comes around this communications. If there's any serial communications like Modbus, or if there's any special communications to legacy protocols, they will need a bit more work. We do have serial communication modules for the RX3i. They do support Modbus, so if you just need Modbus slave or Modbus RTU master, that's straightforward. It's just a matter of reconfiguring those exchanges, and then you'll be able to use the new system. But if it's anything else, any other sort of protocol, then it can get a bit trickier. What we had for the Series 9030, there was something called a programmable coprocessor, and that could be programmed in something called Mega Basic, and we can get the Mega Basic out and we can rewrite it. But it also supported C programs. If you don't have the C source code, then you're stuck, because we can't extract the C code. And even if we could, you'd have to recompile it. And you wouldn't be able to easily do that if you don't have the source code. So the good news is, for the large majority of applications, it's straightforward, but you can always be caught out. So it's like any of these projects, there is some sort of review needed. So what I normally recommend is get hold of a backup of the original program, be it Logic Master or VersaPro or Control. And then what we can do is we can try and import that and see what sort of modules there are and see what changes will be required. That import program, that import process, that will also tell you what goes on with the program. Are there any problematic program blocks? Is there any C? Is there any sequential function charts? And it will warn you about any potential incompatibilities there. So that's always a good way to start, is get hold of a copy of that program. Failing that, just a list of the bill of materials. And probably the worst thing is photographs. A lot of people send in photographs, but it's not always possible to identify what the modules are just by looking at the photographs. It is possible in some cases, but some of the modules don't have the part numbers on the front, so you have to take a bit of a guess. But the real message, certainly when you're starting with a sales engagement, is modernization of Series 9030 is straightforward. The key message is you replace the chassis, the CPU and the power supply. You keep all your existing I/O modules. You keep the I/O wiring. You migrate the program into Pack Machine Edition. You just change the target and download, and it's low risk, low cost, and straightforward. And for many customers, that's exactly the experience they'll get. So this is the one you'll come across the most. As I say, a big installed base of Series 9030. So for most of the applications, that's what's out there, and that's what people are looking to modernize. They may get a machine breakdown, they may need a spare. You may come across customers who are doing some sort of cybersecurity review. You may get customers who've opened a panel and discovered they've got this equipment in there and started looking about, how do I do spares mitigation, or how do I do some sort of any risk mitigation? So that's when they'll come to us and they'll say, I've got this old system, what are the options? And modernization to RX3i would be our recommendation. Okay, so this is the one that's most straightforward. I think there's one caveat to add as well, that there are a few Series 9030 systems that we use for safety applications, but generally they're pretty rare. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But again, that's something to ask the customer, or at least maybe to mention in your reply. This is for standard systems. Safety systems do need special consideration because safety rules have changed. So that brings us on to the 9070. As long as the Series 9070 was used in a non-GMR or non-safety application, then it's a similar sort of story. We can do modernization to PACSystems RX3i with the same sort of low risk. Now, the Series 9070, it's an old platform. It was a lot bigger than the Series 9030. It was about 4 times the size. It was sort of twice as high and twice as deep, similar sort of width. The 9070 was discontinued quite a while ago because of component availability issues. One of the major issues there was that the 9070 used Intel 386 and 486 chips, and they went away a long time ago. So we matured in 2011, discontinued in 2013. We had that 7-year return and repair option, but that's now expired. That expired in about 2020. We can still get the Series 9070 program out using Pack Machine Edition. So we can still support configuration, programming and diagnostics. So again, in the same way we support a Series 9030, there's no end date to Series 90 support, but equally there's no enhancements planned. Now, where the 9070 was used was generally on larger applications that needed either faster throughput or more, maybe for redundancy. Perhaps there were some redundancy applications out there. Probably the main ones, though, that there's a lot of installed base in the North Sea, and most of those are safety applications. But not all of them. You may come across a 9070 because that was the preference of the customer, or that was what was installed because it came over from the USA maybe. The USA had a bigger installed base of Series 9070 because they always like to go bigger, whereas in Europe it was always a lot more cost sensitive, so that's why there's more Series 9030. But if you do come across a Series 9070, it's a similar sort of story. We can replace the chassis, the CPU and the power supply. We can't keep the existing I/O modules, but we can keep the existing I/O wiring. What we have is we have a conversion rack, and that allows you to use new RX3i I/O modules, but keep all of the existing wiring to the existing terminal blocks. So it costs slightly more, and there's a slightly more involved installation process because you've got to put this conversion rack in, but it still gives you that same low risk. It's a bit more cost, but it means that you can keep your I/O wiring, and it means you could still revert back to the original system in case of any problems. So we've got the same conversion via Pack Machine Edition, so same sort of programming support. There is a slight issue, but I'll come into there. But generally, it's a straightforward issue. You just replace a few components, and then you're ready to run very quickly. So just to show you on the next slide, here is what the conversion looks like. You've got your original rack. You unplug all of the I/O terminals, removing the connectors. You install the new conversion rack. You have all of the wiring that goes behind, and there's like a drop down where you install your PACSystems RX3i. And then you just put your new conversion rack in with these pre-wired harnesses that we have, and it's very quick to upgrade to an RX3i controller. We've had people convert from an old 9070 system to a new RX3i system, and they've been back up and running within 2 hours. So we're not talking about days of work here or weeks of work. It's literally just a few hours just to unplug the old system and plug in the new system. So the hardware is very straightforward. Where it might get a bit more complicated is around the programming. So although the programming of the Series 9070 is the same inside Pack Machine Edition, the execution is slightly different. What we have in the 9070 is it used something called column major execution, where you sort of went from top to bottom and then left to right. Whereas in the 9070 and the 9030, it executed left to right and then top to bottom. Now, in most applications, that won't cause an issue because ladder logic pretty much executes the same regardless. But there are one or two possible structures of ladder logic where that column major execution may have a slightly different result. It's mainly around complex parallel branches where you'll have an issue that the column major execution has a different result to the row major execution. So Pack Machine Edition, when you import and change the target from a Series 9070 to an RX3i, it will warn you about potential issues. There shouldn't be that many, and it depends on the complexity of the program, but it does just give you a warning, and then you can go back and just check those and if necessary reprogram them. We can't catch every issue though, but from my experience, most customers don't have an issue here, it just works. We've still got this issue around SFC, not supported. Also this issue about C blocks, which must be recompiled. But again, that's a very small amount of cases using those applications. Most people were just using standard ladder logic, and most people are using simple structures, and it just converts. Another nice feature here, if you've got a HMI SCADA connected, and I should have mentioned this for the Series 9030, it's the same. If you're upgrading to a PACSystems RX3i, your memory map stays the same. So even if you do change the I/O, if you change the Genius and you use Genius Communications Gateway, all of your I/O addresses can remain the same. All of your internal registers can remain the same. So that means that you don't have to modify your HMI SCADA. Okay, again, we've got this issue with Genius. The bus controllers are no longer available. So that's where you'd go to PROFINET with the Genius Communications Gateway. Genius Communications Gateway doesn't support Genius Global Data for peer-to-peer comms, but you can use Ethernet Global Data over Ethernet instead. And again, you've got the same issue of serial communications. If you're using Modbus, it's straightforward because we can do that with the RX3i serial comms modules, but other protocols will need addressing. Now, personally, as I say, I don't think you'll come across many non-GMR Series 9070 applications. We only sold worldwide, I think we only sold about 50,000 9070 systems, and the majority of those were not in Europe, and the ones that we did sell in Europe were mainly safety systems. So yeah, it's possible you might come across this, but I think your main target is Series 9030. But the good news is, from a sales engagement point of view, it's the same story. Replace the power supply, CPU and the chassis, upgrade the I/O modules, but you keep the existing I/O wiring, excuse me, and you keep the capability of doing the application software. So most applications, it's very straightforward to migrate. And the other thing to remember is, even if it's not that straightforward, it's still easier than a complete rip and replace and going to the competitor. Maybe we can only convert 90% of the program. Maybe we can only convert 70%. But converting 70% of the program is a lot better than converting none of it and having to rewrite or re-enter the whole application into some other person's programming application. So even if the program isn't fully convertible, we've still got a good story. Now, moving forward a bit in time, we have got the PACSystems RX7i, which was like the successor to the Series 9070. I don't think you'll come across many of these because we didn't really sell many at all. There was a few sold in the USA. We sold a few in Europe. The big benefit of the RX7i was that compared to the RX3i, it had more powerful processors, so it had faster execution. And the other benefit was it was based on a VME backplane. So you had the possibility of installing third-party modules. So we see a few of these RX7Is in specialist applications, but although the RX7i was launched in 2003, it was very quickly eclipsed by the RX3i that came out in 2004. The RX3i had similar performance, or in some cases, even faster performance, even though it was smaller. A lot of people were finding that the VME functionality was going away as early as the 2000s, the noughties. And they were finding then, if you didn't have VME as a differentiator, why would you spend 2 or 3 times as much on a bigger controller for the same sort of performance? So it sort of naturally died a death by itself, although it was still ROS and component availability issues that made us move it to mature status in 2016. Again, you've got this ROS issue in 2017, so we stopped selling it by July 2017. Again, we can take modules that have failed in the field, they can be returned for repair, but I don't really think you're going to come across many of these RX7i machines. If you do, we can still program them with Pack Machine Edition, but I would recommend that people upgrade to the PACSystems RX3i. So the way you can do that, very similar to the 9070, you can use the same conversion rack. It's the same program. You haven't got this column major execution order anymore. You haven't got issues around SFC or C anymore because it's the same programming package in Pack Machine Edition. The only thing you might come across as an issue is if there are third-party VME modules. So VME stands for Versa Modular Europe. This was a backplane technology, and it was used to import or include third-party functionality that we didn't have. So, for example, there was a Profibus module, and that was made by SST Technologies. I don't think you can get that module anymore, but we didn't have an RX7i Profibus module, so instead we used this third-party VME module. But the good news there is if you were going to upgrade to a PACSystems RX3i, you could use the PACSystems RX3i Profibus module. The other VME modules that you might come across are co-processors, so we can use a separate industrial PC. And then the only other category really would be motion, and we've got good motion support for the RX3i. So there would be some re-engineering required, but the lack of VME capabilities is not really an issue, other than the fact that you have to re-engineer that portion of the application. Now, RX7i was used in redundancy applications. We do have equivalent capability with the RX3i. And that's performed using what's called reflective memory. So if you come across a CMX or RMX module, we've got those equivalent CMX and RMX modules for the RX3i. But again, I don't think you're going to come across that many RX7i systems. Okay, so here's a bit more detail about the application software modernization using PACmachine Edition. Now, the great thing about PACmachine Edition is, we designed it from its launch in about 1999. It wasn't new at that time, but we redesigned it and we added more compilers, and we designed it to be able to import the existing applications. So it does support direct import of Series 90 programs, except for SFC. And you can import programs that I think the main package you'll come across is Logic Master, which is the old DOS application. We can still use that Logic Master software. We can still supply it. I can make it available to you. It's not supported and it has problems running on modern operating systems. For example, it will not install on Windows 7 or Windows 10. But if you've got some virtual machine running DOS or maybe Windows XP or Windows 95, you can still get it to install. So if we need to load the program in Logic Master, we can still get that. The other two applications was Control, also known as CC90, also known as Simplicity Control. And the other application is VersaPro. Those we don't really have anymore. But I think, if we really needed to, we could probably get hold of the media. But generally, people weren't using those. If they were using Control or VersaPro, they'd already migrated to PACmachine Edition. VersaPro, for example, I think it was only supported up to Windows XP. When Windows 95 came out, everyone was moving over to or was it the other way around? Anyway, everyone was moving over to PACmachine Edition in around about the mid-90s. Sorry, the mid-2000s. So I think you won't come across those applications too much, but you might come across Logic Master. So Logic Master, we can import those Logic Master programs. We can't import the backup. So this is important. A lot of the time, people will supply you a backup of the program. We can't import the actual backup files. We need a copy of the original folder itself. So what you're looking for is you're looking for a folder on the hard disk somewhere that includes a file called LM folder. And that file will end in an extension. You get lmfolder.30 for a 9030 folder and lmfolder.70 for a 9070 folder. So you find that folder, and that folder, it's a single flat structure that includes all of the function blocks and subroutines. Ideally, it will include all of the documentation. So what you do is you create a new project in PACmachine Edition. You create a new folder or new target, and then you import that Logic Master folder, and then that will give you that conversion report to tell you how everything came in. So it will tell you what worked, what didn't. It gives you updates about the modules, and if anything's changed, it tells you what program blocks were imported or if they weren't. It tells you if there's any incompatible structures. It might be that some program structures are updated. So, for example, some old legacy nicknames, they use characters which PACmachine Edition doesn't support, but PACmachine Edition will convert those nicknames to new formats. So it allows you to take that program in, and it gives you a pretty comprehensive report about what worked and what didn't, including notes about that column major execution if you were importing an old Series 9070 program. Of course, once you've got your program inside PACmachine Edition, then you can convert the target from whatever it is, Series 90 up to RX3i, and it will give you a similar conversion report, again, with all of that upgrades and everything else that you've had to change. And then once you've done that, you're then ready to download. So you can build, make sure everything's okay. And then, of course, you can do your hardware upgrade and you can download and do your testing. So again, the great thing here is, if your testing fails for whatever reason, because your program isn't executing how you'd expect it to, you've always got that fallback where you can put your original hardware back in. But assuming everything works, then you've got all the new capabilities that are inside Pack Machine Edition. So you can do a lot of new functionality, which the older hardware wouldn't let you do. Yeah, it's maybe we won't come across this now, but I did get people in the earlier days. Yeah, they were saying, I've run out of memory in my Series 9030. What can I do? Well, you can upgrade to an RX3i and you've got more memory space. Yeah, or maybe they want to do more processing of some sort using a different language, such as structured text or function block diagram. Again, yeah, the PACSystems RX3i supports that. So a lot of reasons to upgrade, besides just the fact that the hardware is not available. You get a lot more capabilities now with the RX3i. And let's not forget, I don't think I've got it in any of these slides, but cybersecurity is becoming a big hot topic now. Yeah. So if you want something that's a proper secure platform, then the PACSystems RX3i has that. You've got all the security options, including enhanced security. PACSystems gives you that, whereas the Series 9030 has pretty much no cybersecurity consideration whatsoever. Same with the other platforms like the 9070 and the RX7i. They're not secure. If you're worried about cyber security, then you should be looking at upgrading. So software modernization is straightforward. If you do have to upgrade the hardware, if you're looking at replacing the Genius bus controller with the Genius communications gateway, that's relatively straightforward as well. And we've got some application notes which describe how to do that. But the key is, even if you upgrade, you keep the same I/O addressing, so you don't have to reconfigure your application. So even if you are changing your network structure, even if you're modernizing I/O modules, you're changing from a legacy module to a newer module, you can keep the same I/O addresses. So that really helps when it comes down to your application. You don't have to rewrite it. And it also helps with your HMI SCADA application. You don't need to change your references in your HMI SCADA. So that's nice features you've got in Pack Machine Edition there, which make it very straightforward. Now, just in case you do come across a sequential function chart application, it was relatively straightforward to write in sequential function chart, and some users did take advantage of that for programs which were heavily sequenced. But because SFC was mainly taught in French schools, it was used a lot in France, but we don't come across it in the UK as much. If you think about how an application works, you're designing the application to be debugged by a mechanical engineer, and if they have to use high-level structures, which is what SFC gave you, then they wouldn't necessarily be able to understand that. So because of the customer base for PLCs in the past, the vast majority of applications are written in standard ladder logic. You might get a few communication routines that were written in SFC, but generally it was very rarely used. The good news about the Series 90 application is if it was using SFC, then SFC is known as a high-level organization program. The underlying logic is still ladder logic. So you can still export and rewrite a large proportion of your ladder logic without having to completely rewrite the application. You'd still have to rewrite the actual sequence part of it, but a lot of the existing application, you can keep it as it is. So, it's not a major disaster that you've got an SFC application. It just means that the engineering effort is a bit more involved. And if you look at the way SFC works, what the Series 90 had was it had pre-processing logic and post-processing logic. That was all standard ladder logic. So that comes in as it is. You have logic inside for the transitions and steps. That's ladder logic. So it's really only that sequence functions that you need to rewrite. So I do have a nice application note that explains how to convert SFC into an RX3i application using something like sequence bits or counters to actually do the sequence part of it. So it's not a showstopper. It just means there's a bit more engineering work if you have got an SFC application. So let's have a look at some of the I/O we might come across. We've got field control I/O. Field control is an old I/O system. It was discontinued a long time ago, but because it was quite rugged, it continues to work. So I still come across it today. Nice benefit of field control was it was these nice aluminium housing. It was like cast aluminium, big rugged terminal blocks. The electronics inside was very simple. So it does tend to last quite well. So you do come across field control as an I/O solution for Series 90 controllers. And it might be the field control I/O that gives you more trouble, because although you can easily upgrade the controller, the field control I/O is a bit harder because you can't get the spare parts anymore. Yeah, you can't easily return it. There's no return and repair. I can't even remember when field control was discontinued. Perhaps this slide says here. Yeah, launched in 1992, discontinued in 2009, but it was in mature status from 2003 onwards. So this has been discontinued for almost 20 years, but it's still, it's still out there just because it's very reliable. So what field control I/O did, there was a couple of different bus controller options or bus interface options, but the main one was Genius I/O LAN. So you might find that you've got a Series 9030 controller with a Genius bus controller. You can keep the Genius bus controller, and then you can then upgrade your Genius bus interface on the field control I/O, and you can modernize that to Versamax, because with Versamax, we still support the Genius I/O LAN. If you have a problem with the Genius bus controller, then what we can do is we can replace that with a PROFINET controller, and we can use that Genius Communications Gateway option. So we've still got some good options there to replace field control, but the only disadvantage is that you have to rewire the I/O. So you could use Versamax because that's got a similar range of modules and a similar sort of structure. But if you've got to rewire anyway, you might prefer to use RSTIEP I/O instead. If you're going to rewire, why not take advantage of the latest technology rather than something that's a bit older? Versamax was launched in 1999, but it is current and active. It is fully ROSH compliant, but RSTIEP was launched in 2015. So, it's much more recent. So maybe you prefer to use that instead. So field control I/O, if that's in there, we can easily look at the number of modules installed, and we can come up with a simple replacement for Versamax or RSTIEP based on the number of modules, but it does need rewiring. So I wouldn't want to call it rip and replace because it's normally part of a larger system, but this portion of it effectively is rip and replace. Other I/O you might come across is Genius I/O. Now, we sold a huge number of these blocks, but because of the status of Genius, it was launched in 1984. It went through a few revisions, and although it was in mature status in 2011, we continued to sell it for a while after that until 2017. You can still potentially get return and repair available on these blocks. I think, though, in Europe, Genius is relatively rare, except in GMR systems, unless it's a safety system. And the reason Genius is rare is those blocks were expensive. You were looking at anywhere from, I think it was about £500 or £600 for a 16 I/O block for discrete I/O, and a similar sort of price for like a 4 or 6 channel analog block. There were higher density 32-point blocks as well, again at a similar price. The reason they were the similar prices, they had higher density I/O, but they didn't have advanced diagnostics. So the modules were a bit simpler, so we could make them for a bit lower cost. But because of that high price, a lot of people stopped buying Genius, and that's why people went to field control. Field control was designed as a lower cost version of Genius. Versamax then came along as a slightly lower cost version still. Of course, today we've got RSTIEP. So if you've got a Genius block, then it could still be repaired. Again, these are very rugged, reliable blocks, so there's still a lot of them out there. They were also rebadged as Trio, so ABB DCS use these same blocks. So there are potentially still a few out there, but a lot of people stopped using them probably from about the late noughties because they just got too expensive. So if you've got one of these blocks, you could potentially replace it with Versamax. There's also the RX3i CEP, which I'll show you in a minute. Or again, because you've got to rewire the I/O anyway, you might want to use RSTIEP instead. So where the CEP comes in, this is a RX3i remote carrier interface using PROFINET that allows you to have 1 or 2 RX3i modules in a similar form factor to the Genius block. So you've got the CEP, which is the actual carrier itself with PROFINET, and that supports either an RX3i 695 or 694 module, and then you can have this optional add-on which gives you support for an additional IC 694 module. So this would allow you to replace the majority of Genius blocks out there, regardless of, is it a 4-in, 2-out analog? We can do that with RX3i IO. Is it a Genius IO block which supports both discrete in and discrete out on the same module, which we could do? We can do that. So that's where this module comes in. And if you do come across this where people want to upgrade, we can look at various options there. And we do have a cross-reference to go from Genius to the CEP-IO. So the big change here would be, you've got to rewire the blocks. But one nice feature you've got here is, in a distributed system, you could rewire each block one at a time. So rather than do a big bang approach where every single module has to be replaced before you can modernize, you could have your Genius IO to the Genius block. You would wire in a new Ethernet cable because the CEP is based on PROFINET. You'd keep the Genius block in place, and then you could rewire one block a week. And just then swap the cable over from Genius to PROFINET. If there was any problem, you'd have to rewire back, but you're only looking at about 30 or so terminals. You're not looking at a huge IO system with hundreds of wires. So you could conceivably modernize in small stages rather than have to do everything at once. And with the CEP, you can keep the same IO references, so your application doesn't have to change. So for people who are looking for a staged modernization approach, that's another area where we can help. You don't have to do everything all at once. So moving on, if you do have a GMR system, this is a safety system. So because it's a safety system, it does have special rules, and the way that works is, with a safety system, it has to meet a particular safety integrity level. So SIL 2 is like a lower level of safety, but still quite rigorous. That's commonly used for fire and gas and emergency shutdown systems. And then you've got SIL 3, which is even more rigorous for safety, and that could be used again for more dangerous systems where you've got emergency shutdown. It can also be used for burner management systems. It's also used for like subsea blowout preventers. So there's quite a few GMR systems out there. GMR is based on a combination of Series 9070 controllers and Genius IO. We did move it to mature status in 2011, and it was discontinued in 2013 because of the way that the 9070 worked. So there's no more return on repair options. We are still supporting PAC Machine Edition for the programming and configuration and diagnostics. But anyone who's got a GMR system out there, that they're really going to need to modernize because there's very few spare parts available. But the way it works with safety systems then, if you want to update a safety system, you can't just add a new module or make a small change. You've got to do a complete safety review, and the whole system has to be upgraded to be in accordance with the latest safety standards. So in most cases then, that means your GMR system, it can be left as is, but as soon as you want to modify it or update it, you effectively have to rip it out and replace it with something that's a bit more modern. Now, as I mentioned, I need to update this slide now because I just found that yesterday we may have an option to upgrade from GMR to RX3i. The way that will work is you'll be able to take your existing ladder logic application in the Series 9070 and use that inside an RX3i system. So that will help on the application side, but the IO and the controllers will pretty much need replacing. The way we're doing that, certainly for SIL 2 systems, you'll be able to replace with an RX3i, so it will be a redundant RX3i system with redundant IO. So there might be quite a bit of wiring there, but that will only take you to SIL 2. So if it's a SIL 3 system, then you're looking at maybe an alternative of going to our Mark VIeS. And I think really as soon as you get involved in safety systems, then it becomes a completely different conversation. So although we can offer a safety solution, then it's a much more engineered approach. It's not just something you're going to replace in a weekend. You've got to redo your functional safety study. You've got to look at a lot of different options. You've got to work out, is it a current system? Is it SIL 2 or SIL 3? Ideally, if it's currently SIL 3, you might want to mitigate that to bring it down to SIL 2, because SIL 3 systems, because they're more dangerous, it's more expensive to get insurance. So a lot of people are looking at even existing SIL 3 systems and trying to reduce the safety level down to SIL 2. So there's a lot of other things that go on around these safety system renewals. It's not just take it out and put a new one in. It's, well, what can we do to mitigate the system, to make it more reliable, to reduce the number of safety loops, perhaps, to make it from SIL 3 to SIL 2. So that's a big engineering exercise. Now, assuming you get past all of that engineering exercise, then our solution is Mark VIeS. So it is replacing all hardware. It is re-engineering the software application. That does require rewiring, so it is going to involve a plant shutdown. So as I said, this is a major upgrade, and you will need that functional safety assessment. There's a lot of work there. So why would you choose Mark VIeS? Well, the benefit of the Mark VIeS is that you could put in a third-party safety solution because it's rip and replace. So it does open it up to a competitive approach. But the thing about Mark VIeS is it does have similar architectures to GMR. We've got the same sort of simplex, duplex, or triple modular redundancy. So that helps from the engineering side. And also, if you come to Emerson, we've got a deep understanding of how that GMR I/O works. So it's in cases where you maybe want to reuse some of the existing application, in cases you're not sure how the wiring works, at least if you come to Emerson, then we understand how the existing system works. So that can help, rather than it be just a complete rip and replace, it can be a slightly simpler upgrade because we know how that upgrade can be done. So you'd come to us and we would do the engineering as well as actually do the replacement of the hardware. So it's not just being product supply. We would look at doing perhaps the safety assessment or being involved in that. We would look at providing the engineering services. Another thing we can help with is that because the Mark VIeS supports cause and effect, rather than have to rewrite all of that ladder logic, what you can often do is you can go back to first principles and you can say, right, these are the things I need to shut down when this happens. So that's your cause and effect chart. What are the causes and what are the effects? And typically with a safety system, you've got a variety of causes, and the outcome is you turn off a valve, you close a valve, and that's your shutting down the system. That's where ESD comes from. So we've got cause and effect support. So rather than rewriting ladder or rewriting the application, it can be a lot more straightforward just to directly enter the cause and effect charts directly into the system, and Mark VIeS supports that directly. It's not compiled or interpreted, it's built into the software, it's built into the firmware, so that can reduce the re-engineering considerably. And then, of course, going forward, Mark VIeS, it's a modern solution. It's been around for a few years, but it's still current. It's still got a long life ahead of it. It's still got good cybersecurity. So the Mark VIeS is both a good solution going forward, but we as Emerson have got the skills and the tools to make the engineering effort less compared to rip and replacing with a competitor's solution. So here's a few examples. You take your GMR controller. Each controller, your Series 9070, is replaced by a single Mark VIeS controller. So that's straightforward. The only issue you might need to look at there is what your communications is. So Mark VIeS is based on Ethernet rather than Genius. Then you look at your I/O arrangements, and this looks really complicated, and it was, because with Genius you could have a choice of simplex, duplex, or triplex inputs. And then you can have lots of different options around testing and so on. And Mark VIeS has similar arrangements. So the good news is there, we can do that similar sort of simplex, duplex, or triplex arrangements. The actual hardware is different, but it means that we can integrate the I/O quite easily rather than have to do a lot of work there. And then on the output side, it gets a bit harder because GMR had these H, I, and T arrangements as well as simplex arrangements. So again, based on our technology we have with Mark VIeS, we can do similar sorts of functions, either simplex, or we can do a duplex controller system, or we can do triplex, and there's a variety of different triplex or TMO options there. So again, with our technology and expertise, we can make that transition from a GMR system to Mark VIeS. We can make that a bit more straightforward. From the application point of view, the software is quite straightforward. Again, cause and effect would be a nice way to go forward. You'd have to review the application, but then we do have some nice features inside Mark VIeS. So there's things like sequence of events, which GMR never had. We've got good alarm support, we've got trending. But just bear in mind, a safety system is not a straightforward upgrade. There's a lot of things to consider there. So something else you might come across then is PAC 8000 CPUs. Because of our MTL history, we bought these MTL products from MTL way back in 2008. We productized it as PAC 8000. Now, PAC 8000 currently consists of two ranges. There's the 8000 IO, which is active. So if you've got any 8000 IO there, even if it's a legacy MTL system, we can continue to supply the new IO modules. It's all been redesigned for Roche. They're all current active modules. The only issue is around the old PAC 8000 CPUs themselves. So the way this worked is that the PAC 8000 launch that we acquired from MTL, we continued to sell those products for a long time, but they were based on PowerPC. So they were like IBM type chips, not Intel, they were PowerPC chips. They went away. And because of overall issues, and again, because of Roche, we eventually moved those CPUs to mature status in 2016, discontinued them in 2017. So for the CPUs themselves, no spare parts are available, but the IO modules, they remain active. So for people who've got existing systems, they're probably okay for now. We can still do return and repair of CPUs, and the IO modules, there's no problem with. And if someone wanted to expand an existing system, they could do that just by buying new IO modules, which are still active. But of course, there is a risk. There's the cybersecurity risk. That's one possibility. And then you have got a cutoff date of 2024 when these modules won't be available. There's also an issue around the programming workbench. The PAC 8000 workbench continues to be available, but it's only supported on Windows 7, which itself is no longer available. So you've got a potential cybersecurity issue there. You've also got the issue of how you're going to get Windows 7 running on a modern laptop. You probably have to go to virtualization. So there are issues there. Another big issue through all of this as well is the availability of people that can support this. I had a question about a legacy 8000 system this morning. And it's a system that we stopped selling. We stopped selling the bus interface module in about 2012. So that's stretching my memory. And there's not many people around who used it. So support becomes a big problem. Who you're going to get help from? Is the documentation available? So there's lots of issues here besides just the actual availability of products. But I think if you come across someone who's got a PAC 8000 system, what you want to do is start priming them up to think about how are you going to modernize. And what we can do here is we can take the 8000 CPU and change it to an RX3i rackless CPU. So we're already doing that with one big customer in the UK. They used to be buying PAC 8000 CPUs. They now buy CPE 400s. They had to rewrite the application in PAC Machine Edition. So there was a bit of work to do there. They had to upgrade the 8000 IO, so they replaced the CPU with a Profinet scanner. But the good news was it means they're able to keep all of their existing PAC 8000 IO. So no changes to field wiring. Because this is like an OEM type company, although they had to rewrite the application, we gave them some help with that, and they're using the same application across multiple systems. So once they've done that work once, they can redeploy it multiple times, and then just a few minor modifications if required. So for them, it was a bit more straightforward. If you get a customer that's got a single PAC 8000 CPU, then the engineering effort is going to be a bit more. But the good news is, we can do this modernization, and we've got a modern solution now with the CPE 400, but you can keep that existing IO. So again, it's low risk. You can still go back and put your original CPU in, but equally you can keep your IO, and you can continue then to get benefits with the new software, PAC Machine Edition and RX3i and so on. So we have got a story there for people. I think the issue you need to be aware of is that there were two types of PAC 8000, and this is where some people can get confused. So you might get someone talking to you about PAC 8000, and the main PAC 8000 are those black CPUs you see here on this slide. But some people are talking about SafetyNet. And it looked like a very similar system, and it was the same sort of physical layout, same dimensions for the modules. But the difference was SafetyNet is a safety system, and that one had these yellow modules. So it looks identical. Unfortunately, I haven't got a photograph, but what you'd see labels on the front of the modules, and they would be yellow labels rather than just black or the white plastic. So SafetyNet was based on the same CPUs as PAC 8000, except they were certified for use in SIL2 applications. So identical situation to PAC 8000 CPUs, no more CPUs available. You can still get return and repair. You can still get the IO modules, but the CPUs themselves no longer available. So what you can do there is you could then line the customer up to move to Mark VIeS again. So again, it's pretty much replacing all of the hardware and re-engineering the application. You need to do your functional safety assessment. But the good news, what about choosing Mark VIeS is it's a similar architecture. We can do the simplex 1-out-of-1 diagnostics, which is what effectively SafetyNet was based on. There is a redundant controller option for higher availability. As a business, as Emerson, we have a good understanding of how SafetyNet worked, and we've got access to the tools. And again, you've got options for fast re-engineering using cause and effect. So it's not a straightforward upgrade because you'd have to redo your functional safety assessment again. But as a business, I think we've got a good story there to allow people to take these legacy SafetyNet systems and modernize them up to Mark VIeS. So there was a lot in here. I think if we go back to the beginning, let's see if we go back all the way to slide, where are we? This is the sort of key slide. I think the main applications you're going to come across are going to be Series 9030 based. Because of the huge installed base, Series 9030 is where most customers are. We've sold a lot of machines around the world. Series 9030 machines, they'll be coming in from OEMs around the world. They'll be installed in a large variety of applications, and that's where you're most likely to see these this requirement for modernization. So that's where we've got the best story as well. We've got this nice simple upgrade to PACSystems RX3i. We can use the existing I/O modules, just replace the rack, power supply and CPU, and we can use most or all of the existing application by bringing it through PAC Machine Edition. And then for any of these other products, the story varies. I didn't cover quick panel or IPCs, but we've got a pretty good story for those. PAC Motion, that probably needs a complete slide deck by itself, so I'm not going to go into that one. But generally for the PLC controllers, we've got a good solution. A good solution there, particularly with the Series 9030 and the Alspar 8035, which is where the biggest installed base is. So any questions on any of that?
That was great for me, Steve. Thank you. There was a lot to take in. I was scribbling furiously, but I guess it's more on whether Nick gets it more than me.
I'll say it's a lot to take in there, Steve.
Well, this is just like an overview. So certainly, if you get any more questions, I'm happy to help. I think with my knowledge and experience of these legacy systems, and with the other application engineers who've got this knowledge, we're obviously happy to help. And there's a lot of knowledge around the team of these legacy systems. There is some additional documentation. We have got some more detailed training material. There's also some manuals which explain how to do some of this. So this is very much like a getting started. I will send you a copy of this slide deck so you've got this for reference. I think the thing to do is get the sales team energized to go out and look for these legacy applications, and then let's start working on them. For a lot of these older systems, there is a few years yet where people can still get spares, or they can still modernize, or they can still get repairs. They can modernize, of course, but I think for a lot of people, it's not really a drop dead date that's in the very near future. But we're talking about 2024 for spares and repair availability because of the Roche cutoff. So 2024 isn't too long away now. So I think for a lot of these people, you need to start spreading the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And a big driver for a lot of people is cybersecurity. It's this old system you've got. Do you know what support it's got for cybersecurity? And they won't know, and the answer is none. It's using unsecured protocols. Maybe some of these are completely air gapped. But then the second question is, who supports this? Because how many of these system integrators are really knowledgeable on these old legacy systems and have the programming tools and the programming cables? And then simple questions, like how often do you shut the system down? Do you close it down for 2 weeks over Christmas? Well, are your batteries up to date? And you realize there are no batteries available for this anymore, or if there is a battery, it's a big, bulky, expensive thing that you have to sort of find some panel space for. And then you've got to replace the battery like every 9 months or so. So do you really want that maintenance burden on these legacy systems? Whereas we can give you a good upgrade to something that's more reliable, easier to maintain, has all of this modern capabilities, and gives you that cybersecurity protection. And then of course you can expand then into talk about edge and lean and OE and energy management, continuous improvement, digital transformation. So that opens up all of these other conversations as well.
I think there's a couple of starting points on this, Steve, which I found very interesting, is the fact that the older type of programming software did what I call the old Modicon type programming, where it went in column format.
Yeah,
that was something I could never comprehend in my head, because I only used it for that particular one instance. So it's not readily available. But if you're used to doing that particular application programming, it depends on the complexity of the software. So running it through a migration process is one thing, but the operation of the logic is another. So I think selling the idea of, although it's a transitional system moving forward, it might be worthwhile doing the tests of the programs and actually get the customer to put a backup methodology on their systems first as a first pass, and then have that backed up program to use as a trial to run through the upgrade process. I think it's a bit risk to blindly do the upgrade on a day and just run through the process while they're doing the wiring at the same time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You want to change the program first and make sure that's going to work. Yeah, but you have got a fallback. But that's a good point. You have got the capability or the possibility here as a business. You can sell support services. So yeah, you can help go out there and you can say, well, look, we can keep you going for another year or two. Yeah, we can provide a day on site to upload the program and make sure there's a backup. To maybe just do a review of what you've got installed, and this should be chargeable services. You don't necessarily have to do this on a free of charge basis. Just go in there and do a site audit, find out what they've got installed, and then start thinking about what would be involved when you do come to upgrade in 2, 3, 4, 5 years time, so that then they can begin to think about budgeting for it. Absolutely, it's any sort of change like this does have some risk. So you want to be prepared for it, and that will depend on the risk tolerance of the customer, and the more risk intolerant they are, the more opportunity you've got to sell services to mitigate that risk. So yeah, good points.
I think something for David is to always ask the question of, if this production line was down for a week, how much would it cost you as loss of profit? And then take that as an example of versus doing the actual upgrade for resilience in the first place, and also mentioned the positivity of the fact that the budget in 2020 in March 2021 this year was such that there's a lot more tax breaks if you are doing more investment into the resilience of your actual infrastructure. So maybe now's the time to buy into the resilience of your factory automation for the goods at this moment in time. Take advantage of this.
Absolutely. Good. Thank you, Steve. It was really useful for me to just get that overview, and the takeaway for me is, the main one we need to think about is the 90-30. We having awareness of the others is really useful, and we should expect mainly to be talking about the 90-30, which is great because that mitigates some worries I had. I had things in my mind that people had mentioned before. You mentioned it briefly, like the co-processors and that being a problem, but by the sounds of it, that only affects the 90-70. Is that right?
It does affect the 90-30. That did have the co-processor as well.
It did as well. Okay.
But the majority of the co-processor applications were to implement Modbus RTU master protocol. Right. And the RX3i can do that using the serial communications module. So there's a bit of re-engineering there to actually put in the new module and reconfigure the comms. But that's generally more straightforward. I think there are very few applications using the PCM that weren't for Modbus RTU master. But again, that's where your review has to come in, and communications is always the things that causes problems. Even if it can be a simple matter of, well, how do I do my RS232 or 485 wiring? That in itself can be quite a challenge, because as engineers, we used to do that a lot in the olden days. But when was the last time I did created an RS232 or 485 cable? It was a few years ago now. So you've got that low level physical risk there. So we can make it a lot easier in terms of software, but we've got to look at all of that communications issues, and that might be something else to consider, looking at what's connected. If you've got some legacy device on Modbus, can that be converted to a more modern device that's on Ethernet? So it might be the same protocol, you know, Modbus TCP rather than Modbus RTU, but you've considerably simplified the system by going to an Ethernet-based communication rather than have to mess around with all of these old serial cables. So that again is another reason for selling services to do these sorts of reviews. And communications, yeah, you need to spend a lot of time there looking at what's connected and how it's connected and what it's doing.
Okay, makes sense.
I think this is a support services that could be sold by people who are experienced, as opposed to there's a lot of apprentices that are coming out more into engineering, and I think it's this type of knowledge which will simply be non-existent.
Yeah, especially when this oldies retire.
Oh, I don't think I'll be retiring just yet, but you never know.
No, well, not tomorrow, but you know, who knows? No, we're still going to be around for a while yet. But you're right. Yeah, there's and I think this is the challenge for some end users. You know, they're getting these younger people coming in and they're saying, "Oh, we don't understand this. You're going to have to rip it all out and replace it." So that's where we have an edge. We can say, "Well, you don't need to rip it all out and replace it. We can keep these bits. We can make it a lot simpler, and we can reduce your risk." Because you're coming back to your comment about, you know, what happens if your plant is shut down for a week because of a breakdown. That's one thing. But what if your plant is shut down for 4 weeks? Well, we rewire all of your IO modules. You know, how much is that going to cost? Yeah, it might be your replacement system is £50,000, but if your shutdown cost is £200,000, now your actual exposure is £250,000, a £250,000 to do the upgrade. Whereas with us, if we can keep that existing IO wiring, yeah, it might still be a week of the shutdown, or maybe we can reduce that, but you haven't got that 4 weeks of rewiring. So yeah, it's a considerable reduction in your actual shutdown costs, in your modernization costs. So that's the thing to do, is, you know, we've got to be getting in there before our competitors get in there and say, yeah, we can do all of this, but it's complete rip and replace and it's going to take 4 weeks. We need to get in there and say, well, look, we can replace this, we can replace this. Yes, there's some costs involved, but yeah, you're not looking at a significant shutdown. It's lower risk and it's going to be overall lower cost, and you get a nice modern control system at the end of it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. It's been a really useful talk this morning, Steve, especially with some of the more esoteric type of controllers, which I've not heard of, especially with the RX7i type series. You know, as Emerson have sold these type of PLCs out into the field, is there a record of actually the end users that utilize the Emerson technology, which may assist David in targeting these customers to sell the end of life type knowledge?
Generally, but the way we find out a customer's got one of these is when they come to us for support, or if we just happen to trip over one on the plant. Yeah, in the past, we've sold to OEMs, we've sold via system integrators, you know, we've sold via distribution partners like yourselves. And unless you've kept end user records, or the OEM has, we generally don't know who the end user is. So there isn't really a good installed base list. We know where some of the equipment's going, and we're a lot better at this now because, you know, we are now looking at you know, end user data, and that is part of now some of the data that you collect for us. So if you ask me for modern systems, where are the end users, we could tell you, but for the older applications, no, we don't know where they are. Potentially we could track by this software, but again, for a lot of these users, you know, they buy a machine and it has a Series 9030 in it. They don't have the software themselves. The first thing they know is when the machine breaks down, and then they open up the panel and, oh look, there's a Series 9030. Now, it might not be the Series 9030 that's broken, but because they don't know what the Series 9030 is, and it's a literal black box, yeah, that's what they'll point their finger at. So then you need someone to go in with the programming cable and the software and start investigating the machine, and they say, oh look, the reason the machine's not working is this input isn't working anymore. So yeah, that's affecting this logic, and that's why the output isn't working, and that's why your machine isn't going. So it's not a PLC problem, but you know, not knowing what that PLC is until the machine breaks down, yeah, that's a big challenge for a lot of these users. You know, there's a lot of machines coming in from Germany, perhaps from Italy, from the Far East. Yeah, they've all got Series 9030 on, but because they've come from OEMs but didn't keep the records, and because, you know, channel partners sold to the OEMs and they didn't keep records, yeah, we've got a very limited knowledge of where these systems are until they go wrong and someone calls up for support.
I'll think of some other ideas then, David, how we can sort of, promote this on a marketing perspective to then plant the seed of the idea into the head that it's becoming end of life and something needs to be done now for a timely manner, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've taken our eye off the ball on modernisation. We've had a lot of turnover, a lot of churn as we got taken over by Emerson. But I think we are recognising ourselves now that there's still a lot of this installed base out there. We're going to be doing some activity as well. I'm not exactly sure what, but certainly things like Google AdWords for some of these legacy product names you've got here on the left. That might be a good start. Maybe putting together some white paper or thinking about application references. There's a lot of things we can do there. So I don't know when our new marketing person starts, but maybe I'll raise this with our marketing team and see what sort of we're planning. But yeah, certainly it's a lot out there, and it also raises our brand name as well. The fact that Emerson is good at modernising legacy systems, that's good advertising regardless. Even if someone hasn't got a Series 9070, at least that's raising our profile. So yeah, it's not wasted effort, even if you don't get that many conversions.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think something that may help Novotech as well is if there's a couple of case studies that the conversion process has already occurred and how long it was down for and what type of complexity of the equipment was associated with that upgrade. So for example, if it was a 2 PLC system on a site producing some goods and it wasn't very complex, it was more machine operational, then you can say this was upgraded within a 2-hour window by utilizing the functionality of these conversion blocks or the header module, etc., where the system was back up and running. This was scheduled on a scheduled shutdown on a Monday morning between the hours of 6 and 8, for example. So it was done during the time of other activity to actually minimize downtime, that sort of thing. Or this complex system with multiple X number of PLCs, like 15 plus. This was done on a periodic upgrade process where one entity was done per shutdown over a period of 6 months. So it's not a plant shutdown in its entirety down for 4 days. It was sort of a managed upgrade on a part of the schedule of maintenance as we go along. So as long as it gives indication that it's not going to be a disastrous shutdown and loss of production and loss of entity like that, if it was shown that it was managed, as long as you were prepared well in advance with some planning, then the actual plant production shutdown was an absolute basic minimum.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got some of those. I'll have a look for those. And if you do come across anything and you're not sure, feel free to let me know and I'll be able to help you, because it is quite nuanced and there are a lot of different edge cases which maybe I haven't had time to cover here. There's a lot of old parts out there, so feel free to contact me if you do come across any systems and you want my support. I've been helping other Novotech businesses with this as well, so not just you. There's a lot of this old stuff out there, and in some ways we are relying on you to help us find it, because a lot of these people, they don't come to us. They find a Series 90 or whatever, they Google it, or they know, oh yeah, Novotech, they're the people that deal with that stuff, and they go to them, go to you. So that's often how we find out about it. So you're a vital part of our channel to getting to these customers and getting them modernized. And it's as I say, there's business revenue for you as well, doing these site surveys, doing modernization studies. So it's good business.
Good. Thank you, Steve. You